This is Wednesday, 8 November, Intro to Cybersecurity. Once again, the first attempt of the module assessment went very well. We have 9 students in the class, 7 logged attempts. Not sure what happened with the other 2. But for the students that did respond, the average score was a 4.58. That's pretty close to a 92% average. And with 60 minutes to engage the first attempt of the module assessment, students used a little more than 32 minutes. So that was actually very good. Many students answered items correctly. And in the same manner, for that reason, the Blackboard analysis, the algorithms flagged some as cannot calculate or poor questions because there was no discrimination. There were no differences between student answers, but we understand why that happened. With the difficulty level, students scored so well that the difficulty algorithm calculated that there were 14 easy questions, 3 medium questions, and 1 hard question. I want everyone to understand that when you log your final attempt of the module's assessment, the difficulty level will be significantly different, right? So everybody sees this?
Yeah.
Yeah, we'll have more scenario-based and multiple answer items. We'll try to take it up a level so that we can make sure that folks are really solid on the core concepts and methods. So, and there would probably be a few more assessment items based on the AFES scenario and the solutions. So that's one thing you can expect for the final attempt of the module assessment. So we'll basically exclude the items that everyone answered correctly. So where you see cannot calculate and you see a max score, all students scored these correctly. So those questions will be eliminated from the retake. Just want you to be aware. Let's take a look though at the items that pose the greatest challenge for students with this assessment. So the first item that posed the greatest challenge, it reads, you are a member of the BC PT. Now, PT is a general acronym for planning team. So when you see PT, we're talking about a planning team. Would anyone care to hazard a guess what the BC means?
Business continuity.
Yes, correct. Business continuity. Yes, awesome. So it says you are a member of the business continuity planning team and are presented a resource that will allow essential workers to continue work following a natural disaster. Yay! Resilient resources. Prior to adopting use of this resource, what are some critical criteria that must also be satisfied or valid while disaster conditions remain in effect in order for this to be a viable alternative, right? So you got to kind of put your thinking cap on about a natural disaster scenario. One thing I would argue is sort of a backhanded blessing. How many of you were here for Hurricanes Irma and Maria?
Yeah, I was here.
Okay. Was there anyone who was not here for Hurricane Irma or Hurricane Maria?
I wasn't.
Oh, you missed the fun.
What?
Okay. I know, that sounds crazy. All right, so it would be easier to anticipate some important criteria that still have to be satisfied or valid. So in the aftermath of those hurricanes, there were people that went back to work. So a method of adequate payment to provision this resource must be accessible until regular systems are restored. So if you have people that are back and working, but the ATMs are down and the rest of the banking is offline, you have to have a way to, I mean, you can't assume that essential workers, who would essential workers be? Can anyone give me an example of an essential worker?
Police
Yes.
officers,
Officer.
government officials. things like
Yes,
that.
but police officers, government officials. Anyone else?
Grocery store,
Say again?
a grocery store attendant.
Grocery store. Yes. I mean, sometimes people get a chance to stockpile stuff, but I mean, in the aftermath of a disaster, people still need to eat. They still need to, they need to have water to drink. There's all sorts of things. How about healthcare workers, hospital?
Yeah.
How about construction workers?
Not too much, I guess, not too much. Maybe public works.
Yes, public works and construction would probably be good for removing debris, right? So they wouldn't be doing the normal public work stuff, but they would be engaged to clear the hazards. So, and this is a great dialogue to have because sometimes it's not always so obvious. I will tell you that people who operate heavy machinery that would work after a natural disaster, they're not likely to work many weeks or even days unless they're paid properly. Would you agree with that statement?
Yeah, definitely.
Oh, absolutely. And then assuming that there was a natural disaster and the regular office networks were down, you have to have suitable mobile devices so you can operate and connect reliably to the internet. Things like smartphones that can double as a hotspot. Do any of you have a smartphone that can be used for data connections to the internet as a hotspot?
Yeah.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Yeah, that's a really cool feature. And it's really handy when nobody else is on the internet. Same applications used routinely must be preloaded onto the Windows virtual systems. So let's say you have a Windows machine and it works just like a real physical machine, and it's out in the cloud. As long as that system has the same applications, then you're good to go. Now, students also answered update and revise the business impact analysis to include use of this new resource. It says, while disaster conditions remain in effect, in order for this to be a viable alternative, it would be a good idea. It would be a good idea to update the business impact analysis. But does that by itself have anything to do with the actual plan in use in the aftermath of a disaster? I guess that would be my question. So
you would probably do that like after the fact.
right. Yes. Promptly clear approval for use of the new resource with the IRPT. Does anyone, so that's incident response, right? Incident responders are engaged before we have a disaster. So it doesn't follow logically that you'd have to get permission from first responders to be able to do things after a disaster. It's like, okay, we're way beyond first response. Does everybody understand that logic or the way I'm stating that? I guess that's, I can look at rewording that perhaps just to make it a little more clear, but that's why that particular answer is not a good choice. One thing about multiple answer questions, if you're not sure of an answer, it's recommended that you do not select the answer, because for every one you select, you're not supposed to, it docks points. It takes points off of what the correct answers are. So I just thought I would mention that. And we'll go from there. Does anyone have any other thoughts or comments about this item before we move on? Okay, moving right along. A true-false item posed a challenge for some students. And basically, let's take a close look at this because it sounds like more students answered. Well, there were 2 students that answered true, and then most others got it correct. So it says crisis management is another term for disaster recovery, the management of unexpected challenges brought on by natural or man-made events. That is a false statement. Crisis management is something that kicks into gear with incident handling when the incident takes on a life of its own. And then you realize, oh, this is like the tip of an iceberg, and we just discovered the iceberg that sunk the Titanic, and we have to manage a crisis. It's not another term for disaster recovery, because disaster recovery is a different scope of interests, right? Crisis management helps you continue to operate while you are in trouble. So it is often a component that's embedded within business continuity. If an incident leads to a crisis or you have a natural disaster, then crisis management helps you operate while you are recovering from the disaster. I hope that's another way of stating it in plain English that's sensible. Any questions or comments on this before we go on? All right, then. These multiple choice items were nearly answered correctly by most students. They're each worth 0.25. So there was, I think, a single student that answered incorrectly. In the interest of time, let's make sure I'm saying that correctly. Yes. Okay. Yeah, there was one student that answered. So what we'll do is we'll run past these items unless someone would like to see one. So if there's a head scratcher in the mix here, effective CP continuity planning programs, right? So the bigger umbrella is a continuity plan. Maximum time unacceptable impact, real-time transaction data transfer, examining an adverse event. I'm going to read these out just to see if one of them triggers an interest from anyone. Please speak up.
That one, they provide deterrence. We could look at that one, please.
Yes. Let's take a closer look at that one. And if we discover there's a flaw with the wording or the answers listed, then we'll adjust credit. So this one is a multiple choice item that reads laws, policies. Remember that policies are the local organization's version of laws. So this is one thing to remember, to keep fixed at the front of mind. Yeah. An organization policy is written and it prescribes the standards. In that regard, it is much like the laws. So it's the organization's version of what we would call law. And if you break policies, there are penalties, right? If you break the law, then there's disciplinary action, there's penalties, and it could be civil penalties, criminal penalties, you get sued or you get thrown in jail. With policies, if you break policies at the workplace and it's written standards and you're not doing it, then there are penalties as well. could be demotions, could be termination, right? In some cases, there could be if there was fraud involved, there could be referral to law enforcement, right? But it says laws, policies, and their associated penalties only provide deterrence if which of the following conditions is present. So this is something we went over in class, I think. There has to be a genuine fear of the penalty. If it's a trivial penalty, like, yeah, you'll be suspended for a day. I mean, some employees would think, well, that's a day off, right? Oh, you're suspended 3 days without pay. Now that's different. I'd be afraid to not have pay for 3 out of 5 days in a pay week, in a payroll week. If I came home to my family and was missing 3 days out of 5 for my paycheck, that would be its own penalty, and that's a fearful penalty. Would everyone agree? I mean, is it really a penalty if no one fears it?
No, I think it wouldn't be.
Yeah, if you're not afraid of it, no difference. The probability of being caught. If you were doing something you weren't supposed to, right? So deterrence is only effective if the users perceive that there is a probability that I'm going to get caught. If I'm doing something I'm not supposed to do, I'm probably going to get caught sooner or later. That's a component that makes deterrence effective. The third one is also true. The probability of the penalty being administered. You can have a penalty, but have you ever heard of a place where somebody breaks a rule or a policy or a law? I'm just asking the question. And they don't get into trouble, but someone else breaks a rule, a policy, or a law, and they get into trouble. What do you think the average user would conclude in that case?
Favoritism, probably.
Favoritism? Would they believe that the penalty would be administered consistently?
No.
They wouldn't. They'd probably think, well, as long as it's my buddy, I don't have to worry about it, right? So that's the other element of this. Deterrence, if deterrence is objective, that means I don't care who did it, they get it. If you did it, you get it. I should probably draft some kind of rap, or, you know, I mean, I'm not good at home runs. I tried that once, it was terrible. But if you did it, you get it, right? That's almost musical. The probability of being caught, right? And the fear of the penalty. If those three aren't part of it, it's not a deterrence. So whatever you come up with as a security control, your laws and policies have to have teeth in them. More than one tooth. If you only have one tooth, it doesn't work. All the answers are correct. Does that satisfy your interest with this question?
Yeah.
Okay. So we'll skip over the ones that cannot calculate. Students scored flawlessly correct answers in each of those cases. Even the fill in the blank, but it's the last three that are kind of interesting. Now this matching, everybody got matching correct. So everybody was able to match the law with the purpose or description, right? And that's really good. We'll have another version of this in the final attempt that'll be a lot more challenging, because there are a number of laws, right? Number of cyber laws. Let's look at these two. Multiple answer. So for this item, it reads, you will train tech staff as first responders for cyber events. Digital evidence first responder. That's what that, everybody knows what that means, right? Digital evidence first responder.
Yeah.
Incident handler is what we're saying. The DEFRs, that's another acronym that means incident handler. If you're a DES, digital evidence specialist, then you're working the forensics, you're doing the analysis. Want them to know which discoveries always require immediate action. Select which incident types that meet this critical standard. So we're talking about a case where immediate action is always required. When digital evidence reflects a clear violation of written policy, yes. Proves a criminal law has been violated. Yes, absolutely. How about this one? Shows a user is non-compliant for essential standards. Well, that one might require action, but not immediate action, meaning some users might be identified as in need of additional training. You know, okay. So somebody's non-compliant. Are they non-compliant because they're not as skilled yet? They've had limited training, or so that usually requires a little additional assessment before action is taken. And it's not immediate, right? Indicates unethical activity using systems or data. Does that require immediate action the same way the other ones are? I think I understand why some students selected these items as well. For the final attempt of this assessment, I think what we're going to do with this particular item is add a few words, right? We want them to know which discoveries always require immediate disciplinary or criminal action. Always require immediate disciplinary or criminal. So we'll add the terms disciplinary or criminal to this sentence right at the end here. And that would be much clearer, right? So these would require action, certainly. But again, what we want to do is find out, okay, the nature of the unethical activity, right? Is it possible that unethical activity is legal still? Is that a possibility? You
Yeah, that's a
remember?
possibility.
Yeah, it is. It's a possibility. You can have unethical cases. It's unethical to do a thing, but it's not illegal. We talked about that in class. So if it's not breaking a law, right? That's the tipping point. That's one reason why this is not an ideal option to select. This one, if they're non-compliant, that has to do with job-related performance, right? So when we're talking about immediate action, we're usually talking about hard cases where there's a clear violation of an absolute clear standard or law, and right here, when it's a written policy, that's as good as law, right? So we will adjust that for the final. Any questions? Let's check this one. Ordering. So ordering wasn't entirely correct for some students. You have been directed to investigate suspicious conditions on a running system with an active login. Does that sound familiar?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's right out of the solution, isn't it?
Yeah.
So order your actions according to best practices. The first one is to barge in there without a record of permission to access the system. No, that'll get you fired. If it's somebody else's system and they're actively logged in, you need permission because you don't want to violate privacy. So privacy is important. We have to, did I mention that some places they protect privacy to the point where a business claims that workers are not entitled to do things on their breaks, and they get penalized for doing reasonable activities during their breaks, and it's their private business, and it's their private personal interest, and the business takes action against them, and it's gone to court, and the business is actually lost. Did I not mention that in class? I thought I did.
Yeah, you did.
Yeah, okay. So you cover yourself, right? You cover your assets, CYA, cover your assets. And your own reputation is certainly an asset. The second thing you're going to do is coordinate a change of password to a temporary value, because if there are suspicious conditions on a running system with an active login, the odds are pretty good it's locked out, or there's a screensaver on there. Number 3, you're going to capture views of open applications. And then you're going to capture views of minimized software on the task, on the taskbar. So, and then item 5, the last one, the last step, restore screen elements and lock the screen. So if there's something suspicious, you don't want to tip off people. So you want to put it back. That's the last final step. Any questions about that? I think it's good that 80% of our students got that right. I think that means that if they're doing the solution, they're actually doing the hands-on in that order there. That's pretty good. So here's what we're going to do. I am going to post above the 3.4 assessment. I'll put the 3.5 reconciliation right here. And then I'll post the final version of the Module 3 assessment. You'll have an extended holiday weekend, so you can finish the reconciliation and the final attempt of the Module 3 assessment, and we'll see everybody on Monday. Now, what I would like to do is kind of ease into a couple of the topics for Module 4. You'll notice here that there's talk about cybersecurity personnel, the roles and different credentials. So here it says, relate how an organization's employment policies and practices can support the effort. We're probably going to adjust and include some hands-on stuff for the learning objectives. So I want you to know that part of what comes with layer 8 isn't just the user, but what I would call user controls. Okay. So can anyone think of a practical security control that would prevent users from accessing unauthorized access of data? Can you think of a common method that prevents the wrong people from getting at stuff they're not supposed to get into?
Username.
Say again?
Username and password.
Username and password is absolutely correct. So I think what we're going to do, we have hack tools and controls. What I'd like to do is split out some of the material here, and over the extended holiday weekend, I'm going to revise the learning outcomes. Since Module 4 is about layer 8 and people, I'm going to include the security measures that are exclusive to users, okay? And then when we talk about hacking tools and security measures in module 5, that's going to be more on the equipment and tech side of things, okay? Network security equipment. And has anyone ever heard of intrusion detection systems?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Of course, you've heard of firewalls, right? How about system event integration management, or SEAMS? Log consolidation, system log consolidations.
No, haven't heard of that one.
Okay. Well, so in module 5, there's this thing called a SEAM, and it's becoming all the rage, but basically, if you're in charge of security for an organization, oftentimes when there are bad things that are happening, even during incidents, you need to be able to look at the logs for each of the systems and devices that are connected. Does anyone know how many students we have enrolled in UVI right now?
No, but I'll guess over 2,000.
It's more than 1,500 and less than 2,000, depending on the year. So at any given time, quite a bit, right? And so there's stuff that happens with each user as they're interacting with their devices or systems, and that's in the user side of things, one-on-one with the host, with the clients, right? And then when we get to module 5, it's more of a systems thing. So we're looking at, you know, how do you catch patterns? Well, if you consolidate all of the logs for all of the systems, I would guess that UVI is running between 300 and 500 computer systems at any given time. So if you have something if you have an incident, what you'd want to do is make sure that's not something that's playing out on other screens, right? So that's where the focus will be for module 8. So this is up close and personal, and we'll instead of reserving other security measures on the user level, we'll supplement the material here. And then in 5, it'll be about all the cool $50,000 pieces of equipment. So your study guide tracks with the student learning objectives that are already stated, and we mentioned things about black hats and white hats, and then there is a thing called gray hats, right? Which are kind of in between. And this is sort of a wild card. Has anyone ever heard of the Black Hat Convention?
I think so, yeah.
So they have DEF CON conference. I think that was part of a previous module we got into. So these are cybersecurity professionals. They're supposed to play the bad guy. And in some cases, they do what they're supposed to, but most often black hats are going to act more like bad people. Advanced persistent threats, the real malicious individuals, right? So the goal there is not to do everything that's prescribed. White hats are all about identifying the exposures and doing things above board. And white hats are coordinating with people to give them a heads up. Hey, heads up, I'll be running some tests. Black hats, no, they're not giving anybody any heads up, right? And then you have this quite literally a gray area, right? You have other individuals, and they're opportunistic. So when you think about a gray hat, think about a hacker that sees an opportunity to cash in. So there are scenarios where, okay, what exactly were they doing on your system when they discovered an exposure, right? I didn't invite them, they're uninvited. Are they bad? Well, not really. At least they're open about it. They're going to explain that they have discovered something, and they expect that they're going to be rewarded for it. Now, this is kind of a touchy thing, right? Black hats are going to find something that's bad, and yeah, the whole dynamic's going to play out differently. And oftentimes black hats are professionals who are unapologetic and they think that the best way to have better security is to just hack the crazy out of an organization until they start securing their infrastructure. But they're clearly motivated beyond legal and boundaries, right? So they are motivated by pride and notoriety and money, right? All of those things. And they're not invited. But the gray hat is not invited either. The difference is the gray hat comes out and says, oh, I'm going to help them. I feel sorry for them. And this can be a win-win. And if it's borderline illegal, yeah, they show pictures of something that's exposed. I have an ethical question for you to consider. If a gray hat approached you and your organization and showed you a screenshot of sensitive information, and that included the explanation that this is what's showing out on the open internet. If what they're showing is sensitive information, and that's data that's unauthorized for others to view, but the gray hat discovers it out on the internet, and it's something that anybody on the public network can see. Is a gray hat conducting something illegal if they bring that to your attention and they say, excuse me, you might want to know about this thing out here because anybody can see this? Would you have grounds as an organization to go after the gray hat and give them grief and take them to task with legal measures? Would you really have the means to shame them, prosecute them, shut them up with legal action? What do you think?
Okay, so the means at which they got the info is illegal, but the intention was right, but it's still illegal to access that. So I think you could take legal action against that.
You could, but here's the question. If anybody else can see it out on the open internet, who is that on? Is that on the person who saw it or the person who exposed their stuff so badly that everybody's seeing it anyway? Where does the responsibility for that exposure lie most?
The person who exposed.
Yeah, that's the problem. Here's the thing. If somebody wants to be rewarded, and you can tie the reward to a simple agreement, a legal agreement, okay, I will reward the fact that you have called this to my attention. Two things. You were uninvited. I mean, I know this was out on the public network, but you took measures that other people would take to look at this, right? So you stopped that. We appreciate you calling it to our attention. We certainly want to reward you're calling this to our attention, but we want you to sign this non-disclosure agreement, and in exchange for the reward, you're not putting this out on Facebook, right? Now, the point I'm making here is gray hat scenarios are tricky. And you have some people who are neither black nor white in their operational philosophy or context. But we want you to understand this dynamic, that there is a hybrid. And oftentimes the scenario doesn't end well because the organization is too proud or they're too embarrassed. And my recommendation as a cybersecurity professional of 25 years is, if a gray hat shares something with you that other people can openly access on the internet, you better thank them. Regard them with tact and professional courtesy, but lock it down. Reward them, and as a part of the reward, recruit their discretion, recruit their anonymity, use them in a constructive manner and reward that piece of it, and then explain, don't go tiptoeing elsewhere in my tulips. The fact that you saw this doesn't mean we're inviting you to poke at the rest of our stuff. Just don't. So you get a chance to clarify. People just don't expect this kind of stuff, and leadership is often unprepared to handle it. And I want you to be aware of what to do as a best practice. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, if somebody's taking it to you and they're like, you know, I'm doing you a favor here. You shouldn't play so hard to get that a gray hat. Now, if they flip to the point where they're talking about, you know, you pay me or else I'm going to go public with it, that's extortion. That's not gray, that's black. That's where you can say, well, extortion is blackmail. And, you know, I mean, I appreciate the fact that you have some ethical concerns and you want us to operate safely, and but you can't make me reward you. If I reward you with $500 bonus, right? It's a bounty. I'm rewarding you with a $500 bounty, and you don't think that's enough. We don't get to negotiate, because after that it's extortion. You have to be prepared to say those kinds of things. It's like, yeah, I thought you were a gray hat, but if you keep pushing for more money, that's blackmail. That's law enforcement. Dude, we know who you are now. This isn't going to end well. So don't go there, right? You can manage gray hats effectively if you're prepared for it. It's just very few people are prepared for it. You don't want to underestimate them. Okay, that's the one thing. You don't want to underestimate them. Gray hats can be business partners who are not employed. We talked about contractors. So in our slides, in our last session, at the very end, we talked about this summary where it said temporary employees, business partners, consultants, right? You'll see a lot of gray hats from this dynamic of your operations and your business process. These are people who don't belong to you, and so they can kind of color outside the lines, and they do. And I see a lot of gray hats coming from this particular segment of the business process. They're not your full-time employees. They're not, but they could be a temporary employee that's calling out something that's bad in the hopes that you'll reward them with what? Full-time employment. If a temporary employee found something that was bad and they helped you fix it, wouldn't that be somebody you'd want to keep? Right? You can convert contract employees the same way. A contract employee answers to another business. They're not your employee, but you could reward them by offering to hire them because you'd rather have somebody in your court finding those things. It all depends on the situation, of course. Absolutely. Okay. It's all about preventing information leaks and other kinds of property theft. All right, at that point, what we'll do is close out for the day. Please complete your final attempt of the module assessment over the holiday weekend. I hope you all have a pleasant and safe and pleasant, extended holiday weekend. Good job on the first attempt of the module assessment.